Good morning. It's Saturday and we are live. Let me just close this box. Okay, so today we're going to talk about leaving home. And this is a pattern that you see over and over again in fairy tales. And it's about releasing the past. We've talked previously about how in the beginning, the consciousness is what has been inherited. So it's ancestral, it's parental, it's societal, it's based on all of the things that we are exposed to. Many talk about how it's those first 7 years of life when you're being imprinted by everything that's around you. So in the fairy tales, they often open up, the opening scenario is that scenario that tells us what in fact the situation is. And then the journey becomes the resolution of everything that is identified as me, that's egoic, which isn't based in truth. And then what's being adopted is the story of, not the story, but hopefully no story, but the truth of the ego. And so there's the shift from ego to soul as an identification. The reason why there's this shift happening is because the ego is based on what's temporary, what's changeable, what's impermanent. And the soul is based on and is anchored in the truth, which it doesn't change, which is the permanent, really, that which is unchanging. And so that's what the shift is all about in the stories. And so different stories will resolve different patterns that are associated with the identification, what stories. And so really it's interesting because at particular times in particular cultures, you would have different stories. So like, for example, if I was looking at a story from another culture that I had no knowledge of, I might not understand what the pattern is, what the story is, because I don't understand that culture because I didn't live in it. Some people, I guess, are able to transcend that and find the commonalities, but I'm not sure that if you took these stories and translated them and put them in the East or someplace else, if they would actually be received in the same way or if they would make the same sense, because their inheritance, as like I said, in those first 7 years could possibly be different. So the question is then, what was the childhood environment like? And the precipitating events are often what forces the heroine to leave home. Sometimes it's her choice. Sometimes she makes the decision. Many times she has to make that decision. And it's challenging to leave that behind because that's comfortable. That feels safe. You kind of not, well, the situation itself may not have been, but there can be this way of adapting to it in order to find that sense of safety. So one of the stories that we looked at before is Cinderella. So the story opens typically in when we're in these kind of leaving home stories. The story opens typically to tell us what is the current situation. What does the current situation look like? Something usually is lacking. Something is usually amiss. And that is what then the story is going to, as the journey continues, that is what's going to be resolved. So in Cinderella, as we've talked before, in the beginning, the good mother is missing. And she has died. And what that was, when we talked about it before, was this connection to the first chakra. And that would be nurturing, empathy, caring, nourishment, abundance. Like all of those things would be associated with that first chakra. Grounding, right? Being rooted this sense of safety and security. Like all of that is associated. So when you say that the story begins and that is missing, right, then you understand like what's happening. And so we know in the West that this is a societal condition. This is something that whether you had a good mother or not, you could be challenged in this area because this doesn't exist in the culture at large. And how can we say that? We can say that because the patriarchy has been predominant, and that they have throughout the centuries, the feminine and things associated with the feminine have been subordinated. And also the feminine as something of value has often been misunderstood or repressed or rejected. And so that would go into the unconscious, as we've talked about before. So what is the current the childhood situation? We're talking about Cinderella here. So the stepmother and stepsisters are mean. They're creating an environment that's very hostile. And what does the father do? He doesn't stand up for her. So in essence, she's really on her own here. She has taken on this good girl consciousness from her mother, and she has the caretaker consciousness that has come in. We don't know if it was during her mother or once her mother passed away. We don't know at what point that was actually introduced, but we do know that is her role with her stepmothers and stepsisters, and to some degree her father as well. So what is the environment and the worldview that she has? She's unsafe because she doesn't feel protected, right? That constant hostile environment gives her and her nervous system a sense that this isn't safe. And what happens is that morphs. That idea, this childhood environment really becomes the world environment. And what happens is these environments get replicated. So that it's like a temperature setting on a thermostat. And so it may not be literally the same, but to a certain degree, emotionally and on other levels, it feels the same. So transcending it becomes what the story is about. So she's unsafe, not protected, not seen, and not heard, right? They ignore her. She's in the kitchen. They're, in the parlor having tea, and she's not invited. She's not included. Like everything has her. She sleeps on the hearth. She doesn't have a bedroom. She's not seen. She's somebody who's invisible. And so those kinds of things can get carried through life where there's a sense of not being seen and not being heard. So she's excluded and she feels alone in the world, right? She would feel isolated. She would feel on her own, which would bring up a trust issue for her. So this is the setting that would get replicated. She would feel unloved, unworthy, inadequate, and not enough, because that is what the sisters especially, are constantly picking on her and telling her that she isn't enough. She wears rags. She's always dirty. She sleeps on the hearth. She, is always cooking and cleaning and taking care of everybody else's needs, and hers get ignored, right? So she's lacking, and everything about her situation is lacking in many different ways. She's not valued, and what she feels doesn't matter. What she thinks doesn't matter. What she needs doesn't matter. So this would be a challenging situation to resolve and overcome, because it has so many facets to it, and it's so embedded. But think about it. It's just it's not a difficult thing. It is a difficult thing, but it's simple. I mean, think about that. Just all it was her parents and sisters who were just being mean to her and condescending, right? And it just really has so many facets to it. The implications of it are extensive. So what would the shift then be is, as I was saying at the beginning, from the ego to the soul. So what would happen is these qualities and these things that I just finished saying would be what the sense is of life. And so shifting, those things all are changeable, which we know. And so shifting out of that is becoming identified with something different than those things. So what would be one of the things? I'm safe in my body and protected. And that is often something that we can see that, I think I mentioned this in last week, was that on the one hand, what you have is you have this sense of not being safe. And then at the other hand, you may be able to look back at your own life. If any of thing with Cinderella resonates, then in any of these qualities, then what you can see is if you look back on your life, lots of times you can almost like pick out situations and be like, I didn't feel like I was safe at this particular time in my life, but this happened and this happened and this happened, and it could be perceived as life intervening, life moving me from a situation that felt unsafe, trying to get me to a place where I did feel safe. So it's really fascinating. If you look back, you can often see both things were present in one way or another. So wholeness is the other thing, right? Because I said in the beginning that lack, we've seen in many of the fairy tales that wholeness is a question that or something that needs to be resolved. And wholeness is something that is a state of consciousness that already exists. It's not something that lots of times in other traditions they talk about, you need this or you need that, or you need to retrieve and take back this or take back that in order to be whole. But that's not the case, because wholeness as a state of consciousness already exists. It's pre-existent. It's just being identified with lack. It doesn't mean that it's true. It would be like thinking that you were born and when you were conditioned by your life story to believe that you were your clothes. And so if you had some kind of, wacko parents and they convinced you that your clothes were who you were, it was your identity, then what would happen is when someone said you're not your clothes, you would be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I have to be my clothes. And when you took those off, you would think you were lacking, but you weren't lacking because you were always you, and you never were those clothes. It was never true. Just because you believed it didn't make it true. You may have thought it made it true, but it really didn't. So that's what we're talking about here, is this misidentification, thinking you're something, but you're not actually that which you're thinking that you are. So if there's inherent wholeness, then there is no lack. There is no lack in the heroine, and there's no lack in her situation. That's a deeper truth. So this shift that's happening is going from the old story to these newer truths, and these truths about what is there and what can be changed and what is being anchored is different than what was originally being she was conditioned to believe. So this is a bit of a challenge, because the outer world that you're seeing in a particular way through a particular lens, and then you're trying to shift into this other identification, a couple of things happen. One is that there's a challenge because your mind, out of habit, keeps looking at the situation that you're in as the reality, instead of understanding that the inner state is the reality and the outer state is the result. And so that's a little bit of a challenge to shift that. The other thing is as you embody and anchor the truths into your consciousness, then whatever is out of alignment with that is going to come to the surface. So it makes it feel like you're embodying this situation, and the other thing keeps coming up, and you're like, so this isn't true, but it is true. And so you keep facing the opposite, and what happens is for it to be resolved. So that's why it keeps coming up, is to actually be resolved in your consciousness. So there's a little kind of a transitory period here, little I say, but could be a little bit longer. And in this transitory period, there's this sense of resolving these things that you've inherited. So it kind of like, the way that I see it is, it's like it pushes, it's like putting light in the unconscious, and it pushes it to the surface when you're focusing on embodying these deeper truths. So it's a challenge to shift when in that existing environment. And what often happens is that people try to change the environment in order to resolve the situation that's challenging, or that they're unhappy with. And then they just keep ending up in these same situations where the temperature, the thermostat setting from the childhood just keeps getting replicated. So this is the way to kind of leave home. That's right, the focus of what we're talking about today. So she's talking about I matter and my feelings matter, but what she's seeing in the world, what she's seeing reflected for as long as she's with her stepmother, stepsisters, and father, is the opposite. And so it keeps it, the idea is to keep turning back inside and keep rooting inside instead, and identifying inside instead of with what's happening in the external world. So I am seen and heard, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that the stepmother and the stepsisters and the father are going to see and hear her. But it's like I am seeing and hearing myself. And what will happen is, as this is embodied, the feeling of that will be present. So the universe is seeing and hearing you. It's not about them seeing and hearing you. So as long as you believe that you're not, then that will be what you experience, even though in some ways you may be seen and heard. You'll still think that you're not, because that's the paradigm that you've been conditioned to believe in, and to really the lens to see through. And it will color what actually happens and what you actually see, right? We've talked before about the reticular activating system. It's picking and choosing according to what the inner environment is, what works with that. So I am connected. That you never can't be connected. So the idea of exclusion, isolation, again, that may be what's happening in the outer world, but in an inner sense, that can never be true. There can never be a disconnection. It's just not possible. It, again, can be a belief. It can be a feeling. I feel like I am, but I'm not, even if I think that I am. So is she loved and valued and appreciated? Yes. Life does. Life doesn't make something and then, ignore it. It's here for a reason. This being is here for a reason. She has a role to play, and as we do, we all do. And that role can become more and more conscious and aware as we begin to peel back these layers of what was inherited. Does she have value? Yes, it's inherent. Just being born means you have value. So even though what her environment may reflect that she doesn't, it's inherent. And because it's a part of her, it's just, you're breathing, your heart's beating, you have value. Everybody does, no matter what. Everyone does. So knowing that, it's like a mother with a child. The baby is born and she values and protects and loves. And, we can extrapolate, whether you believe in God or the universe or whatever. You can't imagine that we live in a universe that doesn't love or care about us as much as a human mother cares about her baby. I mean, if you just say, we've talked before about the as above, so below. Like, imagine that there's this being that's so pure that, or not a being, but the universe is so pure that on a basic level, that it would feel more for us than that. And so if you've ever been in that situation where you've felt divine love, or love for a child, or love for a pet, imagine that if you can do that, there must be the universe that is even more pure and less contaminated by the world of form. I shouldn't say contaminated, but you know what I mean, just conditioned is a better word. And less conditioned by the world of form, that would love you even more and care about you even more and value you even more. It just makes sense that that would be the case. So the challenge, as I was saying, is embodying that new paradigm, those new realities, while still being confronted with the old situations. So leaving home is leaving those old consciousness behind, and this is the transformation that we often see in the fairy tales, the step-by-step process. So how do we discover this inherited situation in our own lives? We can start by looking at the mother, and what is the mother's story? What was her primary story? What was her primary worldview? So in my situation, that was a little bit like Cinderella, that my mother didn't feel connected to motherhood. She didn't feel that linked to it emotionally or on any other level, and she felt like it disrupted the trajectory of her life. And I've heard this from friends who also had mothers who had this same situation. So I don't know how common it is, but I have heard from others that they've had similar situations with their parents, where it felt like the mother wanted to live this kind of life, and then motherhood came and forced her onto an alternate path. And so then you look at, like, what are the implications of that story? How does that play out? And so if that's her story, then what did she teach you about the world and life? And that it all oftentimes, like, really surprisingly all fits together like a little puzzle. And then looking at the father, and I mean, when I did ancestral work, I was just fascinated with how there was this story on my mother's side with my maternal grandfather, my maternal great uncle. Both wanted to be pilots and didn't and couldn't. And then my father actually wanted to be a pilot. So both sides of my family had that exact same desire, which is like weird. My father became an aeronautical engineer. So the fact that both sides of the family have that is, and I like that this has been handed down. This is part of the story of the family. And so this is part of the father's story here coming down to me. And I actually had dreams about it and was guided that this is part of the ancestral inheritance that I'm here to resolve. And so we look at the grandparents, and then when you begin to trace these things, you'll see the patterns more clearly. You'll see how, okay, it's not always literal, but it can be others. So like, for example, my mother not connecting to motherhood, you could say my grandmother was so busy that, did she connect to motherhood? I don't know. I don't have that sense in terms of what I've actually heard. But when I look at it, I can see how this pattern has been permeated. And then her mother, my grandmother's mother, was sickly. So you can see how, like, this motherhood was challenged in each area to be really present and loving and caring and affectionate. Like, that wasn't something that kind of passed down through. So seeing what is that environment like, and then the implications of the worldview that came out of that. So it's just really seeing what the commonalities are, seeing what was the temperature, what was the thermostat setting in childhood, what did it feel like to be there, and am I still in the feeling that was the same as then? So seeing how that has translated, maybe you've healed a lot of it. But when I just was looking at something the other day and was just totally surprised, which is how I came to talking about this today, was really surprised at how much that the idea of this, which, I've done inner work for years, but still can be surprised by something that was so obvious that I hadn't seen it. And this was one of those passed down through the generations things that I saw the other day that felt like it was foundational and big. So as you focus on the qualities in the new story, unconscious resistance to the change and contradictory beliefs can get triggered. So it's really noticing and being aware and allowing these things to come and allowing yourself to sit with these feelings that come up. And through that process, it just gets transformed. So in the fairy tales, as I've said before, with the masculine, in union with the masculine, which we are also living, it's not just the fairy tale where the heroine and the prince get married at the end, but it's also within us that we're uniting our own inner masculine and feminine to create balance, to create unity, and to shift into that soul consciousness. So this union can't happen until a decision is made to leave the old consciousness behind. And so we saw this also in Beauty and the Beast. And what was interesting, particularly about Beauty and the Beast and leaving home, is we see in the beginning she's at home. She leaves when she has to go live with the Beast. And then the Beast keeps telling her, you're free, you're free, you're free. She doesn't really believe it, but then he says, you're free and you can do whatever you want to do. And she says, I'd like to go home and see my father, because her father thought she was dead, and let him know that she's okay. Not only okay, but she's thriving. She's very happy. And so she goes home, and remember, she was her sisters kind of caught on to the fact that she promised the Beast that she would be back within 10 days. So she goes home of her own volition. This is what she chose. She wasn't being held by the Beast, but she was free to go. So she sees that by leaving. She sees that she's free to go. And when she goes back, she and her sisters convince her that, oh, we love you so much, we don't want to see you go, blah, blah, blah. And she overstays the 10 days that she had promised Beast that she would be back in. That's not really promising him, it's promising herself. It's promising herself, I'm not going to get distracted. I'm not going to fall into the old story. I'm not going to fall into the old patterns that I inherited. And she gets home and she gets comfortable, and it's okay to stay, and I can stay a little bit longer. And then she has the dream, and the dream alerts her to the implications of her choice in going backwards, in going back to the old. In a sense, it's backwards, but it's not, because there must have been a little bit something that needed to be seen again in order to be fully resolved. So, for example, she may have still had a certain amount of attachment to the old story and the old environment that she had to kind of step into that place and say, okay, I am done with this. I really am finished with this. And this is not what I want anymore. And then she, of her own volition, made the choice, I'm ready to leave and I want to go back. And this is not what I want anymore. This isn't who she is anymore. She had changed so much that it was no longer who she was. And she needed the dream to wake, like I've talked to you before about how really important dreams can be, about telling her that, in fact, you're making the decision to choose this old thing. So who leaves home? Of all the people we've talked about, of all the stories we've talked about, the people, Angelina, Cinderella, Handless Maiden, Rapunzel, Psyche, and Beauty and the Beast. They all left home, and some more than once. Oftentimes, as I was saying, she makes the decision to leave. The heroine has to make that decision to leave home. Remember the Handless Maiden at the very beginning? She said, her father said, stay here and I'll take care of you. And she was like, no, I'm leaving. So she was very courageous. Angelina was too. Remember when the mouse told her she needed to marry the mole, and she finally made the decision, no, I'm going to leave. Because it's stepping into the unknown. It's stepping into something that you have no history for. It's like you're forging a new path into the woods, into the forest. Like, there is no path. It's your life becomes unique. It's no longer these patterns repeating and playing out over and over again. So sometimes she leaves at the beginning of the story, and then the story unfolds to transform consciousness. And guess what? That's how it works for us. It happens to us too. And life, in the dreams, and just the way events happen are all in the service of transforming your consciousness and freeing you from that conditioning that isn't who you are, in order to become identified, to step into the truth of what you are as well, so that you can successfully leave home, right? So if Beauty had gone back home to see her father and stayed and not had the dream, then she wouldn't have left home. She would have gone back to the old consciousness, which was comfortable, familiar, safe, and felt like that thermostat setting is what we're used to. And the new, so when you're stepping into the new, it often feels uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar, and you have to just kind of say, okay, I'm uncomfortable. This is an unfamiliar situation, and I'm going to just allow that as a new setting, as a new feeling. That doesn't mean that something is wrong. That just is a new experience, and allow that to be there through, especially through this transitory period. So the theme of leaving home, they all do it. All of them. There isn't one that just stayed at home. Not one. Sometimes she made the decision, sometimes life made the decision, but they all left home. So, thank you for joining me today. I didn't go over in a big way like I normally do. So, I hope you have a great day and a great week, and I will see you next Saturday.